The eviction notice was taped to our front door at 7:14 in the morning. I know the exact time because I'd just rolled out of bed to grab my phone off the charger, and when I opened the door to grab the mail, it was right there, a bright yellow piece of paper with bold red lettering, folded once and stuck under a piece of clear tape that someone had pressed hard enough to leave a crinkle in the paint. 3-day notice to pay rent or quit. I stood there in my socks and an oversized sleep shirt, holding it with both hands, reading the same 2 sentences over and over, like they were going to rearrange themselves into something less catastrophic. Rent owed, $2,150. Due immediately or vacate the premises within 72 hours. My hands weren't shaking. That's the part I still can't fully explain. I'd expected panic, the kind that shoots up from your stomach and makes your vision go spotty. But instead, I just felt this eerie, cold stillness. Because somewhere in the back of my mind, I already knew. Not the specifics, not yet, but I knew that this yellow paper with its ugly red words, was the answer to a question I'd been too afraid to ask for months. I turned around and walked back into the apartment. Brandon was still in bed. I could hear him breathing from the hallway, that slow, deep rhythm of someone who had absolutely nothing on his conscience. I stood in the doorway of our bedroom for a long moment, staring at the shape of him under our gray duvet, and I thought, he knows. He knows, and he didn't tell me, and somewhere in this apartment there is a reason why. I walked to the kitchen table, set the notice down flat, and picked up my phone. I opened our joint bank account app, the one we'd set up 2 years ago when we first moved in together, the one I almost never checked because I trusted him completely, because I was, as it turns out, an absolute fool. The balance loaded. $214. Not $2,214. Not a typo. $214 in an account that was supposed to have close to $3,000 in it for rent. $3,000 that I had deposited myself from my own direct deposit 11 days ago. I scrolled through the transactions. My eyes caught a charge dated 8 days back. Restoration Hardware, $1,712.47. I had to read it 4 times. Restoration Hardware, $1,712, while our rent sat unpaid. I sat down very slowly in one of our kitchen chairs. I set my phone face up on the table next to the eviction notice. I looked out the window at the parking lot of our apartment complex in suburban Columbus, Ohio, where a woman in scrubs was loading her trunk and a kid on a bike was doing circles around a speed bump. And I thought about the fact that in the next room, my husband of 3 years was sleeping peacefully after spending $1,700 on a couch for his mother. And then I thought about what I was going to say when he woke up. But let me back up, because if I just start with that morning, you won't understand why the Restoration Hardware charge hurt the way it did, not just as a financial betrayal, but as the final, undeniable proof of something I'd been trying to talk myself out of believing for a very long time. My name is Ashley. I'm 31 years old. I work as a dental office manager in a mid-sized practice outside Columbus, which means I schedule appointments, handle insurance billing, manage a staff of 7, and occasionally talk patients down from panic attacks in the chair, all for a salary that is perfectly adequate and never quite enough. I'm organized, I'm practical, I keep a budget spreadsheet that my best friend Jennifer calls aggressively optimistic. I grew up in Dayton, in a house where money was always tight and always discussed at the dinner table, and I swore early on that I would never be the person who didn't know where her money was going. And then I married Brandon Kowalski, and slowly, quietly, without me fully noticing, I became exactly that person. We met at a work happy hour. His company and mine both used the same downtown co-working space, and somebody booked the same rooftop bar on the same Thursday in October. He was tall, easy laughing, the kind of guy who remembers your drink order after one meeting and makes you feel like you're the only person in a crowded room. He sold software for a mid-market logistics company and was genuinely good at it, which meant he also had a way of making things sound better than they were, smoother, more certain, more under control. I found that attractive at first. I found it almost everything at first. We dated for 2 years before we got engaged. In that time, I learned that he was funny and warm and surprisingly good at cooking Thai food, that he cried at the end of Interstellar and pretended he didn't, that he called his mother Linda every Sunday without fail, and that he had what I gently described to Jennifer as a complicated relationship with financial planning. He wasn't irresponsible exactly. He paid his bills, he had a 401k, he didn't carry credit card debt, but he was loose with money in a way that made me quietly nervous. A round of drinks for everyone at the bar, a last-minute flight to Vegas for a buddy's birthday, new sneakers 2 weeks after buying new sneakers. "I work hard," he'd say, with that easy shrug. "I like nice things. Life's short, Ash." I told myself it would balance out. I was the saver, he was the spender. Couples complemented each other. We'd figure it out. What I didn't fully account for was Linda. Brandon's mother lived about 40 minutes from us in a ranch house in Westerville that she'd shared with her husband Gary until Gary passed from a heart attack 5 years before I came into the picture. Linda was 63, sharp as a tack, and completely, unapologetically devoted to her son in a way that I can only describe as territorial. She wasn't cruel to me, not overtly. She was pleasant at Thanksgiving, polite at Christmas, occasionally warm in a way that felt genuine. But she had a habit of calling Brandon at inconvenient times and expecting him to drop everything, of making comments about the apartment we'd chosen. A little small for 2 people, don't you think? Of referring to his money as Brandon's money, even after we were married and had combined finances. She bought him things, little things mostly, a shirt she'd seen on sale, his favorite brand of coffee, and she expected him to buy her things in return. It was their dynamic, established long before I arrived, and I'd made the mistake of assuming that marriage would naturally shift it. It hadn't. But for a long time, for most of our first 2 years as a married couple, things were genuinely okay. We had a 2-bedroom apartment on the 3rd floor of a nice complex called Maplewood Crossing. It had a balcony where I kept potted tomatoes in the summer, and a gym I used 3 mornings a week, and a leasing office staff who knew our names. We had a system. My paycheck covered rent and utilities. His paycheck went to groceries, car payments, and savings. It wasn't glamorous, but it was solid. It was ours. I remember a Saturday morning in March of last year, about 18 months after the wedding, when I woke up early and made coffee and sat on the balcony with a blanket over my legs, watching the parking lot fill up with people walking dogs in the pale spring light. Brandon came out 20 minutes later with his own mug, hair still messy, and sat down across from me without saying anything for a while. Just the 2 of us, the coffee, the quiet. He reached over and put his hand on top of mine and said, "I really like our life, Ash." And I believed him. I squeezed his hand and said, "Me too." That was real. I need you to know that part was real. But somewhere between that morning and the morning I found the eviction notice, something had gone very, very wrong. And the first sign, the one I noticed and then talked myself out of, came about 4 months later, on a Tuesday evening in July, when Brandon came home from work an hour and a half late and walked in the door carrying a large paper shopping bag with the Williams-Sonoma logo on the side. "What's that?" I asked. I was on the couch with my laptop, finishing up some insurance claims from work. He set the bag down on the kitchen counter and pulled out a cast-iron Dutch oven, a big one in deep blue enamel. I recognized the style immediately, Le Creuset, the kind that runs $300 on a normal day. "It was on sale," he said, already anticipating the question. "How much?" $260, but they're usually $350, so, Brandon, I closed my laptop. We talked about not making purchases over $100 without checking in first. That was our rule. He turned to look at me, and there was something in his expression. Not guilt exactly, more like mild impatience, the look of someone who thinks the other person is being slightly unreasonable. "It's a Dutch oven, Ash. It's going to last us 20 years. It's an investment." "It's $260 we didn't discuss." My mom needed one anyway. Hers cracked. I was going to get her one for her birthday next month, so I figured. I held up a hand. So it's not even for us? He blinked. I mean, I'll get her one. This one's for us. But there had been a half-second of hesitation before that answer. Just a flicker, and I noticed it, and I filed it away, and then I told myself I was being paranoid. He'd bought us a Dutch oven. It was fine. We were fine. That was the first crack. I just didn't know yet how wide it was going to get. The Dutch oven sat on our kitchen counter for 6 weeks before I finally put it away in the cabinet below the stove. I'd left it out partly because we actually did use it. Brandon made his chicken tikka masala in it one Sunday, and I had to admit the thing was beautiful, that deep cobalt blue against our white tile backsplash. And partly because every time I looked at it, I felt a little pull of something I couldn't quite name. Not anger, more like a reminder, a physical object that said, pay attention. I tried to pay attention. I really did. The problem was that Brandon was very, very good at making things feel normal. He'd come home from work with his sleeves rolled up and his tie loosened, talking about some deal he was close to closing. And he'd pour himself a glass of water and ask about my day with what seemed like genuine interest. And within 20 minutes, I'd be laughing at something he said, and the Dutch oven would fade back into just being a pot. That was his gift. He could smooth things over without ever technically addressing them, and I had a weakness for being smoothed. But I started watching the bank account more carefully after July. Not obsessively. I didn't set up alerts or anything. I just checked it every few days instead of once a week. Things looked fine through August. Normal charges, groceries at Kroger, gas, a dinner out for our anniversary at a place in the short north that cost more than I would have liked but felt worth it. His paycheck hitting every other Friday, reliable as ever. My paycheck doing the same. I started to relax. I told myself the Dutch oven had been an isolated lapse in judgment, not a pattern. Then came September and Linda's car. Brandon mentioned it on a Wednesday night, casually, the way he mentioned everything uncomfortable, sandwiched between normal conversation, delivered in a tone that dared you to make it a bigger deal than he was making it. We were eating takeout pad thai at the kitchen table, and he said, "So my mom's car needs new brake pads and rotors. The mechanic quoted her $800. I twirled noodles onto my fork. That's expensive. Does she have savings for it? Some, he paused. I told her I'd cover half. I set my fork down. You told her that already? Without talking to me? It's $400, Ash. It's $400 that you committed without a conversation. He looked at me with that expression again, the mild impatience, barely visible but unmistakable, and said, "She's my mother. Her brakes aren't safe. What was I supposed to say?" "You were supposed to say, 'Let me talk to Ashley first.' That's what we agreed." I know. He waved a hand, not dismissively exactly, but close. "I'll make it up in the grocery budget this month. I'll meal prep more. We'll spend less. It's not a crisis." And here's the thing about me that I'm not proud of. I backed down. Because he had a point. It was $400. His mother's brakes were genuinely a safety issue, and I did not want to be the wife who nickel-and-dimed her husband over helping his elderly widowed mother. I did not want to be that person. So I took a breath and said, "Okay, but next time you tell me first. That's non-negotiable." "Absolutely," he said, and he reached across the table and squeezed my hand, and I squeezed back, and we finished our pad thai, and I thought, we're fine. We worked through it. That's what couples do. $400 paid to a mechanic in Westerville. I watched it leave the account, and I noted it, and I moved on. October was quiet. November was quiet. I started to feel genuinely good about things again. We'd had a few weeks of careful spending. Brandon had actually meal prepped like he promised, and we'd managed to put an extra $300 into savings. I remember thinking in early November that maybe we'd turned a corner. Maybe the Dutch oven and the car repair had been the wake-up call we both needed, and now we were going to be more intentional, more communicative. I was optimistic. I was, as Jennifer would later say, catastrophically naive. The first week of December, I got home from work on a Thursday to find Linda sitting at our kitchen table. This wasn't unusual exactly. Linda had a key to our apartment, a fact that I had objected to once, early in our marriage, and then dropped because Brandon looked so genuinely hurt by the suggestion that I take it back that I couldn't stand to press it. So she had a key, and she used it occasionally, always with a text to Brandon first, never to me, to let herself in if she was in the area. I'd made my peace with it, mostly. But that evening there was something different about the energy in the room. Linda was sitting very upright, her hands folded on the table, wearing her good coat still buttoned. And Brandon was standing at the counter with his arms crossed and a look on his face that I could only describe as braced, like someone waiting for a car accident. "Ashley," Linda said, with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Good, you're home." "Linda," I set my bag down. "I didn't know you were coming by." "I was in the area," the standard explanation. "I wanted to talk to you both about something." I looked at Brandon. He looked at the counter. I sat down at the table across from her. "Okay." Linda unfolded her hands and placed them flat on the table, which was a gesture I'd come to associate with her when she was about to say something she'd rehearsed. "I've been thinking about the living room situation," she said. "My couch is completely shot. You've seen it. It's 15 years old. The springs are going. My back has been terrible." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said carefully. "Restoration Hardware has a beautiful sectional on their website. Brandon showed it to me." She paused there, just a beat. "It's a little out of my budget, but Brandon said—" I turned to look at my husband. He was still looking at the counter. "Brandon said he'd help," Linda finished. The room got very quiet. Not the comfortable kind of quiet, the pressurized kind, where everyone is aware that something is being left unsaid. "How much is the sectional?" I asked. My voice came out perfectly level. I was proud of that. "The one I liked is about $1,700, Linda said. $1,700. I kept my eyes on Brandon. He finally looked up and met my gaze, and for a half second I saw something there, something that might have been guilt, or might have been the calculation of how to handle this, before his expression settled into careful neutrality. "We haven't worked out the details yet," he said. "When were you planning to loop me in on the details?" I asked. "That's why Mom's here, so we could all talk about it." I looked at Linda, who was watching me with those sharp, steady eyes of hers, and I understood suddenly that this had been choreographed. She hadn't come over to have a conversation. She'd come over to present a decision that had already been made and make it harder for me to refuse by being physically present. It was a tactic. Not a malicious one, maybe. Maybe she didn't even fully realize she was doing it, but a tactic nonetheless. "Linda," I said, keeping my voice pleasant, "can Brandon and I have a few minutes to talk privately?" Something flickered across her face. "Of course," she said, in a tone that made it clear she thought I was being difficult. She moved to the living room. I heard her settle onto our couch, our perfectly functional, non-restoration hardware couch, and pick up her phone. I turned to Brandon and lowered my voice. "Tell me honestly, did you already agree to buy her the couch?" He ran a hand through his hair. "I said I'd try. That's a yes." "Ash, come on. Where is the money coming from, Brandon? Walk me through it." "I have some flexibility in my end of the budget." "Do you? Because we just put $300 extra into savings, and I was feeling good about that. Where exactly is $1,700 of flexibility hiding?" He looked away. "I can move some things around." "Move what things? Our car payment? Our savings? Our rent?" I heard the edge in my voice and forced myself to dial it back, aware that Linda was 15 feet away. "This is the conversation we were supposed to have before you made promises. This is exactly what I asked you not to do." "She's my mother," he said. And there it was again, that line, deployed like a shield. "She's my mother." As if that ended the argument, as if that was an answer. I stood up straight and looked at him for a long moment. "Tell her we need to think about it," I said finally. "That's all I'm asking. Don't commit tonight." He nodded. He looked relieved, actually, which should have told me something. A man with a clean conscience would have looked contrite. Brandon looked like someone who'd just been handed a small extension on a deadline he already knew he was going to miss. Linda left 20 minutes later, kissing Brandon on the cheek and giving me a hug that was perfectly warm and meant absolutely nothing. After the door closed, Brandon and I stood in the kitchen and had the version of the conversation that I thought was the real one, the one where he agreed to hold off, to look at the numbers together that weekend, to not make any promises he couldn't keep. "I hear you," he said. "You're right. I'll tell her we have to wait until after the holidays." "Thank you," I said, and I meant it. I felt the tension in my shoulders drop about 3 inches. We didn't fight that night. We watched TV on the couch, the perfectly functional one, and he fell asleep before the second episode ended, and I pulled a blanket over him and went to bed feeling cautiously, carefully hopeful. We'd had the conversation. He'd listened. We were going to look at the numbers together. Things were okay. That was December 5th. I didn't check the bank account again until December 19th. I had told myself I would check it on the weekend, and then the weekend got busy, and then work got crazy with end-of-year insurance stuff, and then I just didn't. For 2 weeks, I trusted him, and I didn't check. On December 19th, I opened the app to transfer money for a gift I was buying my mom online, and I saw it. Restoration Hardware, $1,712.47, dated December 8th. 3 days after he looked me in the eye and said, "I hear you. You're right. I'll tell her we have to wait." I sat with my phone in my hand for a very long time. The number just sat there on the screen, perfectly still, absolutely certain of itself. December 8th. He had waited exactly 3 days and then done it anyway. He had looked me in the eye and said the right words and then walked straight through every single one of them. And below that charge, scrolling down, I found the thing that made the restoration hardware charge feel almost secondary by comparison. Because the $1,712.47 had put our account into the negative, briefly, for 2 days, before his paycheck hit on December 13th. And after the paycheck hit, instead of the balance recovering to something healthy, it had barely climbed back to cover the basic charges. I scrolled back further. October, September, the car repair, a charge I hadn't noticed. Linda Kowalski, Venmo, $200, dated October 22nd. Another one, November 14th, $150. And a third, dated just 4 days ago, December 15th, $300. $650 sent directly to Linda over the past 2 months. Not groceries, not car repairs, just money. Transferred quietly, in amounts small enough to disappear into the noise if you weren't paying attention. I had not been paying attention. Our rent was due on the 1st. It was December 19th. And after everything I was looking at, the couch, the Venmo transfers, the general bleeding of our account that I had apparently been sleeping through, I pulled up the balance one more time and did the math. We were $1,936 short. Not a little short, not a rounding error, not a problem that could be solved by skipping a dinner out. Nearly $2,000 short of rent, 12 days out, and the man who had spent that money was in the other room watching football, and as far as I could tell, sleeping just fine at night. I put my phone face down on the bed. I stared at the ceiling, and I thought, he knows the rent is short. He has to know, which means he has a plan, or he thinks he has a plan, or he's been hoping I wouldn't notice until it was too late to do anything but go along with whatever he'd already decided. I picked my phone back up. I opened my texts and typed a message to Jennifer. "Can you talk tonight? Something's wrong, like really wrong." Her response came back in under a minute. "Calling you in 5, leave the room." I got up. I walked to the bathroom, the farthest room from the living room. I ran the faucet and I waited for my phone to ring. And somewhere in the back of my mind, a door I'd been holding shut for months swung open just a crack, just enough to let in the cold air of a thought I hadn't let myself finish until now. He's not going to stop. He was never going to stop. And he knew exactly what he was doing when he said, "I hear you." My phone lit up with Jennifer's name. I took one breath. I answered it. Jennifer picked up on the second ring. "Okay, talk," she said. No hello, no preamble. That's Jennifer. We've been best friends since sophomore year of college, and she has a built-in alarm for when something is actually wrong versus when I'm just venting about my day. I told her everything. Standing in the bathroom with the faucet running, speaking in a low, controlled voice that I barely recognized as my own, I walked her through the restoration hardware charge, the Venmo transfers, the math that didn't add up, the conversation on December 5th where Brandon had looked at me and said all the right words and then done the exact opposite 3 days later. I told her about the Dutch oven in July, about Linda's car brakes in September, about the way he said, "She's my mother," like it was a full and complete answer to every question I could ever ask. Jennifer was quiet for most of it. She made small sounds, not words, just sounds that meant, "I'm here, I'm listening, keep going." When I finished, there was a pause that lasted maybe 4 seconds. "Ashley," she said, "he spent your rent money on a couch for his mother and then lied to your face about it." "Yes." "And you've been watching smaller amounts disappear for months." "Yes." "And now you're 12 days from the first with basically nothing in the account. 1,800 short, give or take." Another pause. "Okay," Jennifer said. "Here's what I need you to do right now, tonight. Are you listening?" "I'm listening." "Screenshot everything. Every transaction, every transfer, every charge. Go back 6 months. Do it right now while you're in that bathroom, before he has any chance to, I don't know, somehow touch the account. Screenshot it all and text it to me." I was already opening the banking app. "Done. Keep going." "Do you have any personal savings? Anything he doesn't have access to?" I thought about it. My individual savings account, the one I'd opened before we got married and never technically combined, the one I kept meaning to consolidate but never did because the interest rate was marginally better. It had a little over $400 in it. Not enough, nowhere near enough, but something. "About 400, I said. "Don't touch it, don't move it, don't tell him about it. That is your emergency fund, and right now you are in an emergency." Her voice was steady and precise, like she was reading from a document. "And Ash, don't confront him tonight. I know you want to. I know your whole body wants to walk out there and flip that coffee table. But don't. Not until you know exactly where you stand." I can't just sit across from him at dinner knowing what I know. Yes, you can. You've been doing it for months without knowing. One more night is not going to kill you. She was right. I hated that she was right, but she was. I took a breath. "Okay. Call me tomorrow, before you say a word to him." I sent her the screenshots, 6 months of transactions, 14 images total, and I turned off the faucet and went back out to the living room. Brandon was exactly where I'd left him, feet up on the coffee table, half watching a game, the picture of a man with a completely clear conscience. He looked up when I came in. "Who were you on the phone with?" "Jennifer," I said. Completely true. "Everything okay?" I sat down on the opposite end of the couch and pulled my knees up. "Just catching up," I said, and I made myself look at the TV, and I watched the game without seeing it, and I didn't say a word about any of it. I don't know how I slept that night, but I did. The next 8 days were the loneliest of my life. I've tried to think of another way to describe them, and I keep coming back to that word, lonely. Not because I was alone. Brandon was right there, physically present, eating dinner across from me and sleeping next to me and saying goodnight like everything was normal. But I was carrying something that I couldn't put down and couldn't share, and the weight of it was enormous. I'd smile at something he said and think, "I know what you did." I'd watch him pour coffee in the morning and think, "You looked me in the eye and lied." I'd lie awake at night listening to him breathe and think, "How long has this been going on? How much more is there that I haven't found yet?" Jennifer called every day. She was my lifeline, sometimes literally, a voice in my ear during my lunch break telling me to hold on, to keep gathering information, to not blow up before I was ready. She'd done some research of her own. "You need to know your rights," she told me on the third day. "Ohio is an equitable distribution state, not a community property state. That matters if things go where I think they might be going." "Jen, we're not there yet." "Ashley," her voice was gentle but firm, "he's been transferring money to his mother without telling you. He spent your rent on a couch after you explicitly told him not to. The account is nearly empty 12 days before the 1st. Where do you think this is going?" I didn't answer, because the answer was already sitting in my chest like a stone. "I'm just saying you should know your options," she said. "That's all." I started keeping a log, a separate notes document on my phone, locked behind a passcode I'd never used before, where I recorded every transaction I'd discovered, the dates of conversations I'd had with Brandon about our finances, the exact words he'd used when he said he'd hold off on the couch, the timeline of Linda's visits. I didn't know what I was going to do with it yet, but Jennifer said to document, and so I documented. On December 23rd, 4 days before Christmas, 10 days after the restoration hardware charge, 5 days until rent was due, I got home from work to find Linda at our kitchen table again. Same good coat, same folded hands. Brandon was in the kitchen, and the energy in the room was that same pressurized stillness from the first time. This time, I didn't sit down. "Linda," I said. "Brandon." "Ashley," Linda smiled. "I wanted to thank you in person. The couch is absolutely beautiful. Brandon helped me pick out the perfect—" "I know about the couch," I said. "I know about all of it." The room got very still. Brandon set down whatever he was holding. A glass. It clinked against the counter. He turned to look at me. His expression was doing something complicated, working through several options at once, and I watched him land on the one he thought would work. Calm, reasonable, slightly aggrieved. "Ash," he said, "can we talk about this later?" "No," I said. "Our rent is due in 5 days. We are $1,800 short. I would actually like to talk about it now." Linda's expression shifted, just slightly, a tightening around the eyes, a lift of her chin. She looked at Brandon. He looked at the counter again. It occurred to me, standing there in my coat with my work bag still on my shoulder, that this was a habit with him, looking at surfaces when he didn't want to look at people. Counters, tables, floors, anywhere but the face that was asking him a direct question. "The rent situation is something Brandon and I have been discussing," Linda said, in the careful tone of someone who has practiced a sentence. I turned to look at her fully. "With respect, Linda, you're not on the lease. This is between me and my husband." "Ashley," Brandon's voice had an edge now. "Don't." "Don't what? Don't ask where our rent money went?" "Don't make a scene." I almost laughed. "Don't make a scene." He was standing in our kitchen, in the apartment we were about to be evicted from, telling me not to make a scene. I looked at him for a long moment, really looked at him, the way you look at something when you're trying to memorize it or understand it, or finally see it clearly. And I said, very quietly, "I'm not making a scene. I'm asking you a question. In our home, that we might not have in 5 days. Linda stood up. "I think I should go." "I think that would be a good idea," I said. She left. And I finally, after 8 days of saying nothing, let myself say some of it. I laid it all out, the screenshots, the log, the 6 months of transfers, the December 8th charge that came 3 days after he looked me in the eye and said he'd wait. I put my phone on the counter with the banking app open, and I said, "Explain this to me." He tried. He used the word miscommunication twice. He said he'd thought the account had more in it than it did. He said Linda needed the couch, that her back was genuinely bad, that she was his mother and he couldn't say no to her, that he was going to fix it, that he had a plan. He said a lot of words, most of them carefully selected, none of them an actual apology. And then he said the thing that I have thought about every single day since. "Look," he said, with a sort of exhausted finality, like he'd been waiting to say this for a while. "We can't afford this place anymore. I've been running the numbers. Even if we pay this month, we're going to keep being tight. My mom has a spare room. We could move in with her for a year, save up, get back on our feet." I stared at him. "I know it's not ideal," he said. "You want us to move in with your mother," I said slowly, "whose couch you just bought with our rent money." He shrugged. Actually shrugged. "It makes financial sense." "Brandon," my voice was very flat, "did you do this on purpose? Did you spend the rent because you wanted us to have to move in with her?" Something crossed his face. Not guilt. Something faster and harder to name. "That's a crazy thing to say." "Is it?" "I made a mistake with the timing, Ash, that's all." But it wasn't all. I knew it wasn't all. And somewhere behind his carefully neutral expression, he knew that I knew. The silence between us had a specific texture now. Not the comfortable silence of a Saturday morning on the balcony, but something brittle and charged, the kind that cracks if you press it. I picked up my phone. I picked up my bag. I walked to the bedroom and I closed the door, and I sat on the edge of the bed in the dark for a long time. My $400, my locked notes document, Jennifer's voice in my ear, "Know your options." I opened my phone. I didn't call Jennifer this time. I Googled, "tenant rights, eviction notice, Ohio, 3 days." And then, on a separate tab, I searched something I hadn't let myself search before. "Divorce attorney, Columbus, Ohio, free consultation." The results loaded. I stared at them. My hands were completely steady, the same steadiness I'd felt that first morning with the eviction notice, that cold, clear stillness that wasn't the absence of feeling, but the presence of something harder and more certain underneath it. I bookmarked 3 names. I sent the links to my own email. Then I put the phone face down on the nightstand, lay back on the bed fully clothed, and stared at the ceiling in the dark. From the living room, I could hear the TV come back on, the low murmur of a game, or maybe the news. Brandon, settling back into his evening like nothing had happened, like everything was fine, like we were fine. I lay there listening to it, and I thought about that Saturday morning 18 months ago, the coffee, the blanket, his hand on mine. I really like our life, Ash. And I let myself feel the full weight of what had been done to it. Not just the money, the lying, the choosing again and again and again to look me in the eye and say the right thing and then do the opposite. The way he'd made me feel like the problem was my asking, not his taking. I felt it. I let it be as bad as it actually was. And then I sat up, because the eviction notice was coming regardless of how I felt about it. The 1st of January was coming regardless. And I was 31 years old. I managed a staff of 7. I could talk a panicking patient through a root canal. And I was absolutely not going to let Brandon Kowalski and his mother's restoration hardware sectional be the thing that broke me. I had 3 names bookmarked and $400 in an account he didn't know existed. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The morning of December 27th arrived gray and cold, the kind of Ohio winter morning that feels like the sky is pressing down on everything beneath it. I was up at 5:30. I hadn't really slept. I'd been lying in that specific way you lie when your body is exhausted, but your brain is running a loop it can't stop. Brandon was still asleep when I got up, and I stood in the doorway of our bedroom for a moment, looking at him the same way I'd looked at him 11 days ago when I found the eviction notice. Same gray duvet, same slow breathing, same absolute stillness of a man with nothing on his conscience. Except this time, I wasn't cold and confused. I was ready. I had spent the previous 48 hours doing things, Concrete, specific, irreversible things that Jennifer had helped me plan, step by step, in a series of phone calls that had started to feel less like conversations between friends and more like strategy sessions. I had called one of the 3 attorneys I'd bookmarked, a woman named Karen Delgado, who had an office in Worthington and a 5-star rating on Google, and a voice on the phone that was calm and precise in a way that made me feel, for the first time in weeks, like the ground was solid under my feet. Her consultation was free. She'd given me 2 hours on December 26th, Christmas Day +1, and I'd sat in her office in my good coat and walked her through everything. The screenshots, the log, the timeline, the Venmo transfers to Linda, the restoration hardware charge dated 3 days after Brandon looked me in the eyes and said he'd wait. Karen had listened without interrupting. When I finished, she folded her hands on her desk and said, "Ashley, what you're describing is financial misconduct within a marriage. Ohio courts take that seriously." She explained my options clearly, without drama. I could file. I had grounds. The documentation I'd assembled was, in her words, unusually thorough for someone who came in without a lawyer. She said it like a compliment. I took it as one. I left her office with a folder of information and a plan. The plan had 3 parts. Part 1 happened on the morning of December 26th, before I saw Karen. I went to my bank, not our joint bank, but the one that held my individual savings account, the $400 Brandon didn't know about, and I opened a new checking account in my name only. Then I called my HR department and requested a direct deposit change, effective immediately, routing my paycheck to the new account. The woman in HR was professionally neutral about it, which I appreciated. No questions, just, change will be effective for your next pay period. My next pay period was January 3rd. That was fine. That was enough. Part 2 was the eviction notice itself. I had called the leasing office at Maplewood Crossing on December 24th, 2 days after Brandon's little announcement that we should just move in with Linda, and I had explained, calmly, that there had been a financial error on our account and that I personally intended to resolve the past due balance. The leasing manager, a woman named Donna who had always been decent to us, said they could extend the 3-day window by 48 hours if I could make a partial payment immediately. I used $300 from my savings account, 75% of what I had, as a good faith deposit. Donna gave me until December 29th to bring the account current. The remaining $1,850 was coming from a source Brandon didn't know about either. Jennifer had offered to lend it to me, interest-free, the moment I told her what was happening. I had argued with her for 20 minutes about it. She had cut me off mid-sentence. "Ashley," she said, "I have the money. You need it. We can make it a formal loan with a written agreement if that makes you feel better, but you are not losing your apartment over a couch his mother is sitting on right now. End of discussion." I paid the loan back over the following 4 months. Every cent. But that morning, Jennifer's $1,850 was sitting in my new checking account, and the apartment was going to be fine, and Brandon didn't know any of it yet. Part 3 was the conversation. He came out of the bedroom at 8:15, hair messy, in a gray t-shirt, and walked straight to the coffee maker the way he always did. I was sitting at the kitchen table with my hands wrapped around my own mug, the folder from Karen Delgado sitting flat on the table in front of me. He noticed it. His eyes flicked to it and then away, the way eyes do when they register something and immediately decide not to acknowledge it. "Morning," he said. "Morning," I said. He poured his coffee. He stood at the counter with his back to me for a moment, and I watched his shoulders, the set of them, and I thought, he knows something is different. He can feel it. He turned around, leaned against the counter, looked at the folder again, then at me. "What's that?" "Sit down, Brandon." Something moved across his face, the briefest flash of something that might have been fear, quickly replaced by the careful neutrality he was so good at. He sat down across from me. I slid the folder to the side and set my phone on the table, screen up, already open to the banking app. Then I placed my notes document next to it. 6 months of transactions, all logged, all dated. I paid the rent, I said. It's handled. The leasing office is squared away through January 1st. He blinked. How? That's not the part we need to talk about. He was quiet. I saw Karen Delgado on Thursday, I said. She's a divorce attorney in Worthington. I had a 2-hour consultation. I kept my voice completely level. I'd practiced this part. I'm telling you that now because I think you deserve to know, and because I'm not interested in doing things behind your back the way you've been doing things behind mine. The color in his face shifted. Something that had been careful went to something rawer, less managed. Ashley, I'm not finished. I put my hand flat on the table, not aggressively, just as a way of grounding myself. I have 6 months of transactions documented. The Dutch oven in July, Linda's car brakes in September, $400 you committed without telling me. The Venmo transfers, $200 in October, $150 in November, $300 on December 15th, $650 sent to your mother in small amounts. And then the couch, $1,712 charged on December 8th, 3 days after you sat across from me at this table and said, I hear you, you're right, I'll wait. He said nothing. His jaw was tight. I did the math, I said. Between the Venmo transfers and the couch, you moved approximately $2,300 toward your mother over the last 3 months. Our rent is $2,150. You knew the account was short. You've known for weeks. And your solution was to wait until we got an eviction notice and then suggest we move in with her. I paused. I want you to tell me that wasn't deliberate. The silence that followed was the longest of our marriage. I watched his face work through several things: defensiveness, calculation, something that might have been the beginning of actual remorse. And then he set his coffee mug down and said, quietly, I thought it would work out. That's not an answer. I didn't plan it, Ash. He stopped, started again. She needed things. She's alone. I couldn't say no to her. You said no to me every time I asked you to check in before spending money. You said no to that rule about $100. You said no to our budget again and again, very quietly, in ways I almost didn't notice. My voice didn't waver. I was proud of that. You had no trouble saying no to me. He looked down at the table. Tell me honestly, I said. Did you think we'd just end up at Linda's? Was that the plan? The pause before his answer was 3 full seconds. I counted them. I thought it might be easier, he said finally, for everyone. I sat back in my chair. I looked at him, really looked at him, this man I had loved genuinely and trusted completely and defended to myself for months. And I felt something clarify inside me, the way a photograph clarifies when the lens finally finds its focus. Not anger, clarity. Easier for Linda, I said, not for me. He didn't argue with that. I picked up the folder and set it in front of him. These are copies of everything I gave Karen. I'm keeping the originals. I've also changed my direct deposit to a personal account effective January 3rd. I'm not removing my contribution to our shared expenses. I'll continue to cover my half of rent and utilities through the end of our lease in February. But I'm not depositing into the joint account anymore. He stared at the folder without opening it. So that's it. I'm protecting myself, I said. That's what I'm doing. That's what I should have been doing months ago. He was quiet for a long time. When he looked up, there was something in his face that I hadn't seen before. Not the smooth reasonableness, not the careful neutrality, but something smaller and more honest. Something that looked almost like shame. I'm sorry, he said. I heard it. I even believed it, in the limited way that a single apology can be believed when it arrives after months of the opposite. But I also knew what Jennifer had told me, what Karen had told me, what the 6 months of screenshots had told me. An apology is a starting point, not a destination. And Brandon and I were very, very far from any destination I wanted to be at. I know, I said, and I meant it. And then I picked up my mug and stood up from the table because there was nothing left to say that morning that hadn't already been said. We lived in that apartment for the remaining 6 weeks of our lease with the specific, suffocating politeness of two people who have said everything true and are now waiting for the calendar to catch up to reality. Brandon moved to the couch after the first week. His choice, not mine. He stopped talking about moving in with Linda. He started, I noticed, actually looking at his phone in the evenings, scrolling through what I assumed were apartment listings. Good. That was good. I filed in January. Karen handled everything with the same calm precision she'd shown in our first meeting. Brandon didn't contest it. Ohio is an equitable distribution state, and by the time all the documentation was in front of a judge, the picture was clear enough that there wasn't much to argue about. The joint account, what was left of it, was divided. He was responsible for his own debt. I walked away with my credit score intact, my individual savings account, and the knowledge that I had not lost a single thing that was actually mine. Jennifer threw me a small dinner the night the divorce was finalized. Just the two of us, a bottle of decent wine, pasta she'd made from scratch. We sat at her kitchen table and she poured 2 glasses and slid one across to me and said simply, "You did that." "We did that," I said. "I couldn't have gotten through it without you." She shook her head. "I gave you a loan and answered the phone. You did the rest." I thought about that Saturday morning on the balcony, Brandon's hand on mine. I really like our life, Ash. And I let the memory sit there for a moment without trying to do anything with it. It had been real. That part had been real. And losing it had cost me something genuine. And I wasn't going to pretend otherwise just to make the ending feel cleaner. But I was 31 years old. I managed a staff of 7. I had a locked notes document, a new checking account, and a best friend who answered the phone in under a minute when it mattered. I had walked into Karen Delgado's office with 6 months of screenshots and walked out with a plan. I had paid Jennifer back every cent by April. And Linda's restoration hardware sectional, the one that had cost us our apartment, our marriage, and approximately 6 months of my sanity, was sitting in a ranch house in Westerville, 40 minutes away, holding up just fine. Some things are built to last. I just made sure from that point forward that I was one of them.